Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss here again at allpointstv.com, and I'd like to welcome aboard for our second show in this series we're doing with WFOV, Our Voices Radio 92.1, and we're glad to have them aboard. The allpointstv.com train. Now, we're going to call it the train here. We're glad to have you aboard as well. Those of you out there in the listening audience, I want you to stay tuned for the next hour. And we hope to bring you some information that will make your day a little bit brighter.
Now, in light of the past, you might have a few listeners on WFOV that are not aware of who you are and what you do. Just give a brief thing about what you are and what your show is often about.
Okay, and that's a good idea too, John. I should tell them that we've been doing this program here at allpointstv.com for the last 8 years, and we are a program that comes on here at the studio on podcasts. And we are here from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock live. That's every Monday, without exception. And you can also pick us up on YouTube at your convenience. I'm George Moss. I've been doing this program for 8 years, but I was also a classroom teacher in the Beecher School District for 36 years. I was 3 years a principal out there. And we say that once a Buccaneer, you're always a Buccaneer. So I am still a Buccaneer, but I've also worked at other institutions. I was at the university here locally. I've been in some of the universities and taught there in other cities. But as I said, once you are a Buck, you are a Buccaneer for life. And I would have my identity built around that particular statement about once a Buccaneer, always a Buccaneer. We're going to be talking about a couple of topics here today. I wanted to say a few things about the 50th anniversary of 1967. Do you know what happened on July the 23rd, 1967? It was 50 years ago to the day, yesterday. And ironically, the 23rd, 50 years ago, was also on a Sunday. And yesterday was, of course, Sunday, the 23rd of July, and it was exactly yesterday, 50 years ago, that the country witnessed the third most deadly riot in this country's history. In the event that happened on the 23rd of July, 1967, there were 43 persons that died. The numbers there were topped in the riot that occurred in 1992. You probably recall that riot. Those of you who weren't sucking your thumb at that point and weren't on the baby bottle and probably were in your teens or somewhere around there, if you recall it. In the riot that occurred in 1992 over the Rodney King incident, there were 69 people that died, but those two violent events, both the riot in 1967 and also the Los Angeles riot in 1992, those two events did not have combined the number of deaths that occurred during the riots, the draft riots that occurred in 1863, called the draft riots. And you probably recall that on April the 12th, 1861, there was a firing on Fort Sumter, and the so-called Civil War had begun at that point. It will not heat up immediately, but over time, you'll see the war really getting serious. A lot of persons thought that calmer minds would prevail and people would calm down and the country would get back to the business of being a United States of America. The United States of America are, and the idea there was that each of the states at that time, about 22 and 11, 33 states altogether, they were the United States. The United States are, meaning that each one was a separate province, or you could say a separate sovereignty. And in 1863, given the fact that the Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation, January the 1st of 1863, the idea now that this war is being changed from a war to save the Union, it certainly was still that, but in addition to that, it was to now emancipate the slaves in those states that were in rebellion, and you're recruiting people in the northern states to fight this war. And they're seeing it now as a war that if they win it, they lose, because there would be those slaves off those plantations that would be competing for their jobs. And so now you have that in the mix. Well, in those riots that occurred in 1863, the draft riots, 115 persons died in that riot, and that would be more than the 43 in Detroit and the 69 in Los Angeles. Those two together would equal to 112, and that number does not come up to the 115 that was the loss of life during the draft riots of 1863. I wanted to talk about the 50th anniversary of the riot in Detroit in 1967, because I don't think anybody's gotten this right. I think a lot of people make assumptions about events, and some of it is not all unplanned. I think there's something to be said about people behind the scenes manipulating it so that becomes the conclusion. But I think very little was being said about the 50th anniversary, and really the event that occurred 50 years ago. I think very little of that is really true in terms of what this riot was really all about. And we'll talk about that, but I want to preface that. I want to go back first and talk about, just to show you that things are not always the way they appear to be on the surface. And I'm going to preface these remarks about the riot in 1967 by reading some things here in this book written by Dr. Thomas Woods. I won't read the book. I don't want to read the pages of the book. I want to read the bullets on the cover. And he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets, 5 different statements about things that people take to be true, but are not true based upon what the record actually says. It's called. This is Dr. Thomas Woods. He's one of my favorite writers, and Woods is one of those out of the box thinkers. The book is called "The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History." So you know it's going to be good, because I like politically incorrect. You know, most persons are walking around right now with 5 pounds of modifiers right there at the tip of the tongue. Should I say it? You know, what's that commercial? They have a commercial saying, it's either or kind of commercial. I forget how the jingle goes. Should I go or should I stay? Well, you know, should you say it or should you not say it? And so everything is politically correct right now. So when I saw this book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, I was instantly I was interested in the book instantly. And so he says on the cover, "You think you know American history, but did you know?" And there are 5 different things that he states that set the record a little bit straighter than what is a normative view. Most person would have some umbrage to these bullets. So let me read these bullets to you. You think you know American history, but did you know the American revolutionaries were actually conservatives? Did you know the Puritans, those who landed here in 1620, the Puritans did not steal Indian lands? Did you know FDR agreed to send 1 million Russian POWs back to Stalin? That Roosevelt called Stalin Uncle Joe. So think about that as you're now talking about colluding with the Russians. FDR agreed to send 1 million Russian POWs, prisoners of war, back to Stalin. Was that collusion? Did you know landslide Lyndon Johnson, and they got the words landslide Lyndon in quotation mark. So did you know landslide Lyndon Johnson stole his first Senate race? And there's an apocryphal story about this Mexican American was on the curve in Texas crying because his daddy didn't stop by to see him, and he was bawling, and they asked him, "What are you crying about?" He said, "My dad came to the state last night, and he didn't stop by to see me." And the boy was, doing his eyes and trying to dry his tears up. And it said, "Jose, your dad's been dead for the last 10 years. And the boy said, "I know, but he stopped by here last night to vote for Lyndon Johnson." And the joke is that landslide Johnson had, I guess he could see dead folks too. He had people coming back from the grave. I guess you can call it the cemetery vote. The cemetery vote, and that was the vote that gave Johnson his landslide. I think he won by about 104 votes, even though he was fudging the numbers a little bit. He didn't win. It wasn't a landslide, but it's saying landslide Johnson because even that it was a close race. But that was the first time that Johnson had won his senatorial seat. I think that year was 1946, somewhere around there. Johnson had been a New Dealer, so a lot of the ideas that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had, you'll see that in the Great Society programs of the 1960s during Johnson's tenure, where he served the last years of Kennedy's term, and then he ran on a term on his own. And so landslide Johnson stole his first Senate seat. Did you know the war on poverty made poverty worse? And that'll tie in a little bit to what we're going to talk about in terms of the riot of 1967, because a lot of people are saying that riot came out of the fact that people were so impoverished in Detroit that poverty, the lack of housing, the lack of a quality education, the lack of jobs, and the usual excuse making would have led to the third most violent riot in American history. But Woods are saying here, the war on poverty made poverty worse. So the problem that they were trying to resolve, it wasn't as bad as it's going to get with the help. It's like you tell the government again, stop helping me because my condition is not improving, it's getting worse. Don't pass any more health care provisions because thank you, John, because that's not working. And you're making things a lot worse with the help that you're giving us, because the help, and that's what government does. The help is not improving the situation. The help is driving the condition in the opposite direction. Everything is heading south. So help us by leaving us alone.
See, I've lived in Flint all my life, and I've been around Detroit. Here and there, I'd go there. And I'm 54, so I mean, I was coming up I was 4 years old when the riots occurred, and I looked at what was going on there, and I see pictures up from what the era was before, after, and then I've also looked at Flint and city of Flint and the city of Detroit, they're always constantly applauding this, this rebirth of Detroit and this rebirth of Flint. But I don't see where it was. I mean, all this redistribution we did of wealth, I just seen that basically being largely fittered away. I could use a better term, but fittered away. I just don't see much benefits. It's lasting, giving people money who didn't work for it. I don't see where it actually pays off. I don't. I mean, I like to see they kept. Back when I was a kid, we used to have like at Williams School, which is down the road from here from the studio. They had a big money coming in from the tax base we had here, because I was going there in the 70s, and that was before GM made its exodus. And plus they had Mott Foundation give them buku bucks to that place, for like different programs and stuff. And a lot of people got a good education, and they also got some stuff for like training for vocational stuff, like lapidary or whatever, stuff you could use for hobbies or even a career if you wanted to choose it. But now I just don't see, even when you look at that, this is a ghost town for those people who have those skills, exited as well because they didn't see anything potential here. And our city just seems to concentrate on 4 blocks on South Saginaw Street and want to do all the development in that area, and say then they want us to be pleased with that amount of stuff when basically that's in the handful of a relative few people. And if you're not the outsider, if you're not the insider in that group, you don't really enjoy the benefit of that either. So I mean, to me, I just basically see 50-some years of social welfare programs basically leading to more of the town being more of a ghost town.
That is so true in terms of, you look at the things they say about slavery as far as blacks are concerned. They say slavery has led to the discombobulation we see right now in the black community, where the black family has been decimated, and we now have somewhere upwards of 70%, probably around 75% of all the children born out of wedlock, and the 2-parent household has been shattered. And a lot of people start looking back to slavery as having caused that, and the momentum of that has been accelerated over time to the point where we're now at this point, and we are critical mass. But that doesn't hold. The evidence does not support that proposition, although it's very widespread. The fact is that the welfare state, so the war on poverty made poverty worse, but it also made the conditions in the community it was trying to address, made that worse as well. And what were, in 1965, you recall Daniel Patrick Moynihan had written a report on the black family, a call to action, and he said that the family, that there was critical problems that were going to develop more so in the future unless this problem was addressed. He said that the black family was in crisis because he saw this developing storm, and there was all kind of criticism saying he was in fact an alarmist and all of those things. But now that we have moved from 65 to the present time in 2017, we can see that Moynihan was exactly right. And what was bad enough in 1965 is now 3 times that in 2017. So the one poverty made poverty worse, but it made a lot of other things worse as well. Government has to stop helping us. And did you know, finally, hundreds of American liberals had secret ties to the Soviets? And go read this book called Blacked Out in History. It's about the McCarthy period. And what they're saying there is that McCarthy wasn't as much off his rocker as it made it appear during that time, that he was onto something. Hundreds of American liberals had secret ties to the Soviets because they thought that this was the utopian purpose that they had been seeking. I mean, this is before Bill Ayers and before Saul Alinsky and Gramsci and those persons that were trying to bring about a fundamental, have we heard this in a time recent, fundamental transformation of America. But they were trying to do that back in the time of the Cold War. And Woods is saying here, hundreds of American liberals had secret ties to the Soviets, so that brings McCarthy back up, and a lot of things they were saying about him and how much he was off the mark and things of that sort. McCarthy was onto something.
Well, they for one thing, they wanted to depict him as the zealot right wing. McCarthy had been actually a Democrat before. He just he went to the Republican Party just before the McCarthy era started. But another thing is too, he had voted for FDR 4 times. He had been back behind a lot of the New Deal programs that FDR had proposed and got pushed through. So he was not the zealot right wing corporatist that we see now in the Republican Party. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party both have transformed itself since the 1930s, and people they just dismiss that fact. And another thing is too, both have basically become like Hayek said. He addresses that book, wrote a description to the socialist of all parties, and he saw that he was very present, and he saw that the Republicans have become very socialistic as well. But yeah, McCarthy was not the zealot right wing hate filled guy that he hated communism. He saw the butchery that went on in communist countries. He didn't want that here.
He was trying to make America great. He was trying to make America great again, and maintaining the greatness in the country in the face of the Cold War. It was really going on at that point. And don't forget that in the Rosenberg trial in 1953. During the Eisenhower administration, the Russians had obtained the nuclear weapon, and the monopoly this country had was no longer a monopoly, because now the adversary of the country, communist country, we were a capitalist country, and now they have the atomic secrets, and now that problem is, how did they get that? You can read a very good book, by the way. I think it's one of the best books I've read on that whole time period. There's a book out written by Louis Nizer, Nizer, Louis, Louis Nizer, Nizer. And Nizer was a lawyer back in that time period, and he was doing some work on the case. And his book called The Implosion Conspiracy. That book, that is one of the best books I read. One of those books that when you pick it up and start to read it, you don't put it down. And there are very few books like that, but there are some like that. William Shirer's book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, is like that. I thought this fictional book by Mario Puzo was like that. The book called The Godfather. I don't read very many novels, but that book, every time a chapter would end, it ended on such a note, you want to, what's the next part? And you want to run to the next part and read that. But Nizer's book was one that once you start to read it, you don't put that book down, and it's riveting. And you see that there was more to that Rosenberg case than persons thought. And those that were saying that there was nothing to it because they had the wrong person and things of that sort, I think Louis Nizer shows that they pretty much, without blowing their cover, they did have some persons outside the country that were feeding back that you had this on them and that on them without revealing where the sources came from, because there were spy operations in Russia, and some of the communication, they didn't know they were talking to double agents in Russia, and they had clandestine operations tying them to what was going on there as far as atomic secrets were concerned. But hundreds of American liberals had secret ties to the Soviets, and that's no longer a secret anymore. We know that was true, and now we're dealing with this whole issue of collusion. Much of it is a witch hunt with Donald Trump, but they're raising this question about the amount of collusion that was in the government during this last campaign. And I don't think that, I wonder how serious they are, because if they really want to do an investigation, you have to do that investigation starting with those on the left. Because when it says hundreds of American liberals, that is the left. And they had secret ties to the Soviets. That's the, I think a lot of this thing they're doing, a lot of what they're doing with Donald Trump is a projection of it. because the first thing you do when you want to throw the limelight away from yourself, you throw it on the other person and blame that person for what you're doing. And I think it was that rule number 5 in Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. That's what Saul Alinsky was talking about doing, that when your enemies come at you and begin to make an accusation, what you do is that you use the accusation against the one that is making the accusation and blame that person, kill the messenger.
Okay, we're going to a break right now. Those who are for WFOV will be right back after these messages from WFOV 92.1. And we thank you for welcoming you on board here, and we'll be right back.
Okay, that was very good, John. And we're back with our production here at allpointstv.com. And we will welcome back WFOV in about 4 minutes. And John will let us know when that time comes. Again, we're glad to have you aboard. I wanted to say that yesterday was our 50th anniversary, and I think everybody, I read all the papers. I went and collected the papers about, the Detroit Free Press had a whole section, I think it was section B of the paper yesterday, and they had a whole section, 8-page section, on the riot that occurred in Detroit 50 years ago. And then the Journal here locally, they did a number of articles on it. Some are very good, as a matter of fact. And I was really interested in some of the ones that were reminiscing about what had occurred 50 years ago. And there was one person in particular, Azarine Jones, who was 12 years old at the time that this riot broke out. And she is now a retired baker, B-A-K-E-R, baker. And she's living in Farmington Hills today, but she was a resident in the 12th Street in Claremont, where this raid occurred at 3:45 in the morning, because this riot will begin to blossom out of control over the course of hours. It didn't start out as being a riot. There are some things that happened prior to that, and if it had been handled differently, this riot would not have occurred. And that's what I want to say before we get through with this discussion. I want to try to put the onus of what happened here in a different place than what's been conjured up and I think thought of and politically put in place as political correctness to explain what occurred 50 years ago and what caused this riot. And they're always talking about it because of despair, and blacks had no out, and they were going to bad schools and didn't have jobs. Housing was bad and things of that sort, as if a riot is burning down, in this case here, 2,000 buildings, 400 houses burned. So people are being dispossessed as far as their housing is concerned. 2,000 stores and other buildings are destroyed, so you're killing jobs here. And Azarine Jones, the person that was reminiscing about what occurred in her neighborhood 50 years ago when she was a 12-year-old child, she was making a very good point in her memory of the 12th Street area. 12th Street right now, by the way, is called Rosa Parks Boulevard, because Rosa Parks moved to Detroit in the aftermath of the bus boycott in Montgomery, and John Conyers, who during the riot was in his second term in Detroit, invited Rosa Parks to come to the city, and she was working in his office, as a matter of fact, at a certain point.
Now we're coming up on 26 minutes, and so we're going to be welcoming back the listeners from WFOV. So we'll hold with it a couple of seconds, and we're going to say our official greeting back to them. And and we're coming right up on it, and we'll resume our conversation. But we've got to give a recap to what we were talking about prior. So
yes,
welcome back, WFOV listeners.
Want to just tell you, we were just talking about we're just getting really into a discussion about the things that caused a riot 50 years ago in Detroit. I do want to say a few things about it, though, that I think are wrong and that we've gotten wrong about this riot. Thomas Sowell made an interesting statement about the status of the Detroit residents at that time, and I think that his work has pretty much put to bed this notion that despair explains this riot. You know, a lot of people like to say that it was because persons were disfranchised, their voice was not heard. I remember King saying that a riot is the language of the unheard. And it sounds like that would be the reason why people strike out like that. But maybe not that most of the times. It certainly wasn't the case in Detroit. And Sewell makes it clear in his writing that in Detroit, at the time of the riot, 3.4% of the people in Detroit were unemployed. And when you have 4% or less unemployment, most economists would consider 4% and less unemployed, they count that as full employment. Because you're never going to have 100% of the people employed. There's always going to be somebody that is not in the labor force. But if you get to 4%, they say that's probably as good as an economy that's working efficiently and is churning on all cylinders. That's pretty good. That's not too bad. And they had 3.4% in Detroit because of General Motors, and they had for a while, didn't have it at this time, but they had for a while, they had Hudson down there. You probably remember Packard. What about the Studebaker? Now they would go belly up, but those were job makers in Detroit. And a lot of blacks, by the way, Asmund Jones' father, I was talking about the fact that at 12 years of age, she was reporting, as she was reminiscing about what her recollections of what happened, she was talking about her memory of watching her father's dismay because his barber shop went up in smoke. And she said in her recollections that she remembered him never rebuilding that barber shop. He went and worked in some other jobs over the rest of his work career, but he never did build that barbershop back up. But she was talking about how in that community, she was actually validating what Thomas Sowell had written about it in terms of his data, looking at what had happened before the riot and what happened after the riot was over. She was really validating what his research showed. She said that that in that community they had a theater, they had a butcher shop, they had a dairy shop that was there. She said that her mother never learned to drive. And the store was in walking distance, so her mother could just go to the grocery store down the street and bring the grocery back and things of that sort. And she said in her report, these are her words, she said it was just a nice place to live. And so that flies in the face of all of what I was reading in the various newspapers about how bad Detroit was, that led to the riot and so on and so forth. And the data doesn't indicate that to be true. In other words, this idea that riots come out of the language, the riots are the language of the unheard, that I'm not saying that's never true, but I'm absolutely saying it, given my study and looking at the research on the riot in 1967, I'm saying it was not true in this case. That's absolutely a fact. This riot, when you look at all of the different circumstances that were surrounding what occurred at around 3:45 in the morning, first of all, most persons are asleep at this point. So what is that? How is this riot forming at 3:45 in the morning when a crowd begins to gather around this speakeasy, as they called it. Really, it was a blind. It's now called a blind pig. And let me tell you what my suspicions are, because some things that I know specific to the facts, and there are some things I have made conjectural claims about, because I think the facts lead to this conjectural claim. But I'm not going to say the claim is factual, because the data lends itself to multiple interpretations. But the one that I have is that the speakeasy that was raided, or you call it the blind pig that was raided, I think is that has to do with some things between that operation and what was going on downtown. Now let's talk about just a minute the speakeasy. Now what are speakeasies? The speakeasies come out of the prohibition that started with the 18th Amendment that was passed in 1918, where you outlaw and make it legal throughout all the states at that time. You would make it illegal to sell alcohol. It's kind of like the time in the country's history where we had, this kind of Victorian kind of idea. And so selling booze was kind of like not something to be done, because look at how it is immoral, and look at how it's bringing the country down and is unpatriotic, and you get that into the landscape. And so in 1918, Congress passed the required number of votes in the House, 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. They passed an amendment to the Constitution and make it illegal in all the states to sell alcohol, and it was ratified by 3/4 of the states. It was proposed by the 2/3 of the Congress, and then ratified by 3/4 of the states. And now we have prohibition in the country. But do people still want to drink? Did the prohibition put a prohibition on their taste buds? And so all that happened there was that it took what was above ground and tax. It took what was above ground and placed it underground, and they called those speakeasies. Speakeasies because the idea was, it wasn't speak softly and carry a big stick, which is what Roosevelt talked about. This is to speak in whispered terms about where the locations of the quote-unquote joints, Joints, where are the speakeasies? And you're whispering this, and you're talking about where they are in fact, located. And so after the repeal of the prohibition, because nobody was following the prohibition, the fact is that there probably was more booze being sold after the prohibition had kicked in 1918 as it was before that, because when you outlaw something that people want to do, they want, more of it, because it is in fact, outlawed. I mean, the first thing you want to do when they used to publish these books, they wanted the book to be banned in Boston. They had books out called Banned in Boston. That would advertise the book, because people want to now read it. So they would hope you would ban it so that you draw more attention to it.
You look at Ginsberg's book Howl. It was like a banned because it was profanity and stuff like that, or obscene. And normally a book of poetry, even by a well-known poet, maybe sells a few thousand, volumes or books, and because of that ban, it enticed people more to read it. I think he sold over 1 million, I think, of that book, and probably wouldn't have kind of gone by largely unnoticed if they hadn't tried to ban it.
If you ban it, people want to know what's in it, because what's in it that makes it so bad that it had to be banned, and now they want to read it because, hey, there must be something in there that you tell somebody they're not supposed to read something, or they're not supposed to to engage in a certain practice. That's what they desire, at least to try, because they want to find out what it's about. They want their own experience in it. And so this idea you banning booze, those that were not drinking booze want to try it because it is in fact prohibited. You know, it's something about, you know, the authority, and you want to exercise your own power. You want to show that you have sovereignty in your own space. And so when somebody tells you that you can't do something, then you want to show you can do it. In fact, a lot of persons that want to sell houses, use one of the tactics they would use is tell a person that they could not afford the house. And that person probably couldn't afford the house, but then they want to prove the guy wrong, and they go out there and borrow all the money and get all this indebtedness, and they would purchase it just to show the guy was in fact wrong, because he told them what they couldn't do. And so the prohibition was like that. In 1918, they passed the 18th Amendment, outlawing, and you'll see in the Constitution where it says prohibition. But it wasn't working because people are going to do with their bodies what they want to do. And so that went on with wink, wink, as if they could stop people from putting stuff in their mouth they want to put in their mouth, because that's their space and they feel that they have sovereignty in their own space. So that didn't work. And so in 1933, with the 21st Amendment, they repealed the 18th Amendment and put booze back out there. Now you got this problem. The speakeasies that have been operating covertly, clandestinely, after hours, without notice. But let's be honest about this. But because they are operating illegally, but they're also the only ones selling booze at this time, the authorities are turning the other cheek. First of all, they can't stop it. So that invites them to come in then and join into the benefits of it, because they're not going to put this fire out, because people that want to drink are going to drink. And so the speakeasies were the forerunners of what they call the blind pig. After the prohibition had ended and they now repealed the 18th Amendment, and they're selling alcohol above the counter, that means the speakeasies or the blind pigs. And what does that word mean, blind pigs? It means that the police officers are not going to be so much on enforcing the law, as long as you're paying off in graft what you be paying off in taxes. You see, here's my contention. My contention is that when you had prohibition lifted, and you had the state saying that you could sell booze during these hours but not after hours, I don't think that's all innocent. I'm probably the only one that has this analysis of this, because I'm joining in Sowell's point to an extent that it wasn't poverty that drove this riot, and I think that's really true. But my analysis goes a little bit outside of the box more so than does Thomas Sowell, whom I have a lot of respect for, because his analyses are always data driven, and he's very good at his research. But I'm doing some conjectural things here with the data, and I'm saying there were some other things going on that I think you have to look at as what this riot really was all about. So this particular speakeasy, where you're whispering about where the booze is, where it's being sold, and where you can get a shot after hours, because it can't compete with the legalized operation, because they're operating in broad daylight, because the authorities have given them the onus of legality, give them the appearance of legality in selling booze, because the state has now licensed it, and the state licensed it because the state is getting a cut of it. Because if you're going to sell booze, you pay the state the taxes on it, and that makes it. And what makes it legal? Let's be honest about this. What makes it legal is that what you're selling, the state gets a cut in the form of taxes. But what I think is going on here is that when the speakeasies didn't go away, when they legalized the drugs, those I call a drug above the counter, to me it looks like, based on the data, the state is milking, and when I say state, I mean the political officials of the cities. They are milking both sides of the street. They'll say you tax the booze above the counter, and then you tax the booze that's sold after hours under the counter, but it's not called a tax, it's graft. I mean, one has one has this name and one has another name, but it's the same thing. The money is going into the coffers of the state. It's just that one doesn't reach the coffers of the state like the treasury. It goes in the pockets directly of the politicians. And what I'm saying here, I want to be clear about it. I'm saying that I think when you look at this riot down there in Detroit 50 years ago, you look and see that not every speakeasy, not every blind pig, and some call it a blind tiger, not everyone was raided. This one was raided. And I said in the post that I did that I think if you look at it underneath the surface and look at it much more deep, peel the layers back and peel it back and see what was really going on, you'll see that more than likely that one place was not paying the bill, the graph, wasn't greasing the palms of some folks downtown, and they weren't buying it. Now, there's some other things involved in it too. I'm not going to say that's the only factor. Some of the speakeasies were being complained about by the ministers in Detroit because their members are out there going there like on Saturday, and then they wouldn't have the church money on Sunday. So they don't want those things around the churches because that's competition for the dollars. It's an economic thing. You can claim morality because it would be a moral issue as well, but underneath the surface it would also be about the economics of it, because the same dollars that would be spent over here could be spent over there, and if they spent over here, they're not being spent over there. So the church has a claim that operation is immoral because it's illegal, but part of it is that it has a fiduciary effect upon the church, because people like to go to the club on Saturday, and then they go and pray about the sins that they had the day before on Sunday. And so there's a lot of pressure to shut these things down, and you have to shut it every once in a while. You have to do a raid to act like that you're doing that and make headlines. You shut this down. There's a raid of the blind pig, but really you don't raid the ones that's paying to operate after hours. And I think this is one of the ones that was not paying that fee, because there's some other blind pigs that were not raided, but this one was raided. The problem though is that they went in there. First of all, you send a person in there. I have a brother that's on the police force in Birmingham, but he's retired now. But I remember some of the stories he would tell me, and how they would first of all send a person inside of the operation, and they make a buy, and they are sitting in there and they are talking covertly on they're wired, and so on their microphone they are telling what's going on and so on and so forth. And once the buy is made, they got a witness that they're selling after hours, and they're selling booze illegally, because this booze is not licensed by the state to be sold at this operation. But you have to understand something, that by having the businesses legitimately selling up to 2 o'clock, isn't it interesting that it stops at 2? And what does that do? It gives an opportunity to the speakeasies to operate. So, so what you have here is that the state gets its graph That's what taxes are. I mean, you could call it a number of things. You could call taxes another name, and it would be true: theft. The state is stealing money that is not the state's. It doesn't belong to the state. The state takes it. The state takes it by force. If you don't pay it, here are the consequences for not paying it. But that money does not belong to the state. It's graft. You pay the state in order to stay out of jail. A tax is an out of jail expense.
Like people like cigarettes, they always raise the price on them, and they say, okay, then they say, well, we want to do this with that money. No, you just want the money because you already have existing programs you need to continue to feed. So don't give me it's done because you care about us. Because the same government, or a bigger part of the government, will now take your kids when they reenact the draft, and I think that's down the road. They'll send your kid to war to get killed, but they're concerned about your health smoking cigarettes. It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, they're philanthropists, right, John? They really care about our well-being.
Right.
That's what happened in that Eric Garner case in New York. Remember that Eric Garner case in New York? The reason why that case came out so badly, Eric Garner, the one that had asthma, and he was out there trying to sell cigarettes on the corner. Well, de Blasio and the mayor of New York, they're not going to let him stand out there and do that, because one of the ways the state is getting a lot of its money to run the social programs in New York City is that they are putting a large tax called the sin tax on cigarettes. Now, everybody gonna be blaming the police about what happened to Eric Garner and all of that, but behind that is another thing that's going on here, and the reason why they were sent out there in the first place to stop Garner is because by him selling those cigarettes, the state is losing revenue because they're not buying the cigarettes over the counter, and the state is losing money, the city is losing money, and they can't allow that competition to exist. That's what those officers out there. Now, I know the press was talking about how Eric Garner couldn't breathe. Well, I guess not. When people sitting in your chest because you won't allow them to handcuff you, and they're not going to allow your hands to be free because you may haul off and give them a knuckle sandwich and it doesn't have cheese with it. A knuckle sandwich without cheese, that hurts. So they want to secure your hands, and this is a big guy. Anybody seen the picture of Eric Garner? This is a big guy. And in fact, the way they brought him down shows how big he was, because if a person's not that large, you can simply get right behind him and pull him back, and his knees will buckle over, and you pull him down to the ground and let gravity take him down. They couldn't do that with Eric Garner, because if you got right behind him and try to take him down, that guy was so big, he just simply leaned back this way, you on his back. He can throw you off to the side, and then do some other stuff. I don't know if he knew any karate, but you could be at a disadvantage. So if you notice how they took him down, they got on the side of him because the legs are not made to go to the side. I mean, they lock at that point. But if you go to the back of Garner, I studied that case too. Because I'm reading this book called The Political Incorrect Guide to American History, and a lot of things they report are politically correct. I want the political incorrect view, and when I go behind the person, do my own research, because I research everything.
But I want the facts. I don't want the
facts.
I don't want the narrative. I want the facts.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's what I want. And
you sound like Friday over there. That sound like Joe Friday.
Well, the thing is,
just the facts, man.
But very few places give that to you now. Very few media outlets. So they don't. We try to do it here more. What we're trying to do here is more. And by the way, we've got to give a plug too, though. This is All Points TV on WFOV 92.1 FM, and I don't know what time frame it's going to be in, but anyway, it's coming up on 55 minutes. So anyway, about 57, we probably wrap it up. But I want you to just know that, give you a head up, and also I want the listeners to know that you can see these entire shows on All Points TV on YouTube, so subscribe to there. Also, like our channel, subscribe on Facebook too. All right.
Okay, I want to thank WFOV for being our partners, and our Voices Radio 92.1, We are allpointstv.com here at the studio, allpointstv.com, and we are very glad to have you as our partners out there in the listening audience as well. I will summarize this by saying that when you go back and look at this event, it doesn't wash that this was about despair. This riot could have been prevented, but there were certain blundering mistakes that were made, and what had been intended to be a raid of a blind pig, meaning that this is a operation after hours. They went in there to arrest between what they thought maybe 10 to 12 persons were going to be arrested, and they went in there and there were 82 people in there. I mean, almost all Detroit was in there getting some after-hour, happiness. And they weren't prepared for 82. They were prepared for 10 to 12, but didn't have enough wagons for the others. And rather than making an addendum in their plans, I mean, you're going to arrest everybody that's in there, but it's 82 people there, not 12 in there, not 10 in there. And rather than making an addendum, given how many persons were in there, you had planned to arrest everybody that was there, but everybody that's there is larger than the number that you went there to arrest, and you don't have the capacity to arrest them. And they went there and decided that everybody's going to jail. And that means that they're out there waiting for the wagons to arrive. There are people getting out of control and getting unruly, and the officers out there waiting for the wagons to arrive. The crowd is trying to find out what's going on, and before you know it, somebody threw a bottle, and if you respond to that, some other folks get mad, and this thing is buzzing out of control. And when they start breaking the stores, it wasn't stopped. Kavanaugh said, the mayor of Detroit sends a command down, don't exacerbate, make things worse. People see people not being arrested, more folks coming out. And before you know it, we have a full-fledged riot on our hand, and 43 persons are going to die. Now, the politicians are going to say it's all because of despair, because politicians don't want to take the blame for it.
Well, anyway, viewers,
we got to close down,
Yep.
and but that's what happened, not what they're saying in the paper. Okay, we got to get out of here. Glad you're with us today, and we'll see you again next week, same time, 2 o'clock, here at allpointstv.com, and also at WFOV 92.1, Our Voices Radio. Until next time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.